Well, welcome back to the Live.Stock, our UT Beef and Forage Center podcast. I'm Bruno Pedreira, the forage specialist, alongside with Dr. Katie Mason, our beef systems specialist here today. Very, very glad to have today with us Dr. Gary Bates again. He was here with us a few weeks ago talking about the Beef and Forage Center, right? Why we create the Beef and Forage Center, why we are here. But today, our conversation will be a little bit different. We are going to change the gears a little bit, and we are glad to receive him here again to talk about his forage career, right? What we did and what he did in Tennessee in the last, 30 years. So, Gary, thanks again for finding time in your agenda to be here with us and spend some time talking about forage in Tennessee.
All right. Well, thanks. I appreciate the invitation. Bruno and Katie, my friends.
We're happy to have you.
There you go.
Good. Let's do it. Gary, I think I want to start here with the very beginning. I want you to start to telling us when you start here, what you found here. What was the scenario in Tennessee when you arrived here? 1992, 3?
Yeah, 93.
So
Yeah.
how was that?
Well, so look, Tennessee had a great forage program before I got here. Okay, so let's not think that Bates did anything. I just held on for dear life. But my predecessor, Joe Burns, he had been the forage specialist for like 35 years. So it's interesting in what 65 years, we've only had 3 forage specialists. You're the third one. So, but yeah, so we had a great program, but there were limitations, over the course of the last 30 years. There's been a lot of advancements that, at the time, and none of these things seemed like, I knew some of these advancements were important, but I look back and it's like, wow, some of this stuff is incredible what has happened. And so, I can't take credit for any of them. You just kind of, the technology comes from all the various sources, whether it be industry or some research that somebody's done or whatever, but you just try to figure out where they fit into, programs in Tennessee and how can producers use them. And, there's been a lot of things that have been very beneficial to the forage production programs in Tennessee.
That's great.
Yeah, so maybe just kind of kicking that off, let's dig a little bit deeper into some of those different advancements. The first one, which is not my wheelhouse, but let's talk about herbicides.
Yeah.
So technologies that have come out, maybe some, different chemical formulations or things that you have seen on the herbicide.
Yeah. So when I started, we basically had 2 herbicides that we could use. We had either 2,4-D or dicamba. And so we either used 2,4-D or we used dicamba. It was Banville was the trade name at that point, or we used a mixture of those two, which was at the time the brand name was like Weed Master, and there's several of them now. And that was what you had. And it did a really good job, with 2,4-D did great on Buttercup, and then plantains maybe, and some of the easy to control stuff. And it 2,4-D still works today. It's still a really great herbicide. We had a bunch of weeds we could not control, horse nettle, and then we also had a problem with a lot of the summer weeds, spiny pigweed and ragweed, and so some of those type of things that we had a hard time controlling. But it was because when I started, the way the tobacco industry was, every beef cattle farm had at least 1 acre of tobacco.
And that's important to mention, Gary, because it at least for me, it was brand new, right? When I moved here, it's very Tennessee, this, because the tobacco industry here was huge at that point.
Yes.
And we could not use anything.
Well, it was, you had to be very cautious and conscious of the fact of, in fact, that was one of the things when somebody wanted to talk to me about controlling weeds, the first question I say was, okay, where is your tobacco? And invariably it was, in the middle of a pasture somewhere, or right next to it or something like that. And so you had to be really careful because of drift with 2,4-D, because that tobacco was a very important, economic thing for that farm. Now, over the course of, the last 30 years, the tobacco industry has changed. And so now there's not as many people that have tobacco and the acreage has gotten larger. So it's not nearly as big of a deal as it used to be, but we had problems controlling some of our summer weeds. And then, when you look at it, Corteva now, it used to be, Dow
Dow.
when they developed or discovered or created, however you want to call that, aminopyrrolid, that molecule that they specifically kind of targeted horse nettle, which is, a perennial weed, comes from seed and rhizomes, got stickers on it so animals don't eat around it. Oh, it's just a mess. And it gave us the opportunity to be able to control that. So they started out with, Milestone, which was just pure aminopyrrolid, and Graze on Next, which is a mixture of the aminopyrrolid and 2,4-D, but it gave us options now to be able to control stuff. There's not, it's not perfect. It has issues you have to pay attention to in terms of residual activity in the soil and stuff like that. But it really gave you opportunities to control weeds, so that now there really are very few weeds that we can't control. There's still some out there that are kind of hard to deal with, but we can do a pretty good job controlling weeds. Now, so there's been a lot of advancements that have come through, and a lot of that came, quite honestly, because of Roundup Ready crops. Was, all these Roundup Ready crops, chemical companies were looking, it's like, okay, Roundup is about all that people are using at that point. This is before Roundup resistant weeds and all. And Corteva, Dow AgroSciences was a company that said, okay, well, there's a market out here for weed control and for herbicides and forages. There's more acres of forages than there are anything else in the nation. So let's go there. And Corteva has been a real, benefit in terms of their focus on forage production and weed control. So
that's great. I think that's one of the great advancements, right? We are able to kill weeds that we are not 20, 30 years ago. And it's very, I think that it's a really good feeling to have another tool in the toolbox that we can use to help farmers to thrive on this.
Well, look, so I remember one time I went to a guy's farm. It's somewhere in Middle Tennessee, and he had an orchard grass field that it was just absolutely eaten up with horse nettle. And so I looked at our weed control guide and talked to our weed specialist at the time. And really the only thing that this is well before any of the Graze on Next stuff. And all we had to be able to recommend was Banville. And so we recommended, Banville, and he probably spent $25 to $30 an acre. And he basically burnt the horse nettle down, and the next year it was back to the same problem. And he was not pleased with the result that he got on that, basically. And that was, I learned at that point, I was never going to recommend Banville again to try to kill horse nettle, because it would burn the tops down, but it would not really
kill the plant.
It wouldn't give you significant control. And that was the kind of situation we were in. And even then, it was hard to get rid of it because you couldn't till it up because you spread those rhizomes. And so basically, if you had a bad horse nettle problem, you were forced to go to annuals for a couple of years to try to kill the horse nettle. And that's not always a great situation.
And I think at least, to me, coming from a more tropical background, it's one of the things that is really challenging here in Tennessee is that as we have these cool season forage systems, during the summer month, we will not have fescue growing, right? Orchard grass, all of these plants will be kind of dormant for a few months. And we do have a lot of warm season weeds.
Right.
That's a real challenge to be in a cool season system.
I could just say yes. It's significant. I mean, and it's part of, but it's you learn to be able to deal with it, and use some other forage species, use some of the warm season stuff, and you can make it work. But we can do things now because of herbicides that we could never do.
Exactly.
You're right. It makes it feel really nice when you have a lot of tools in the toolbox to be able to try to go with, and even with some of the newer formulations of herbicides, so we can kill a lot of woody stuff. Whether you have the pasture guards and those kind of things, where if people start having woody invasive type plants, we have ways to be able to kill those now. So We don't really have a lot of excuse if you have weedy pasture. We have ways to control.
Now we have tools to work with them, right?
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Broom sedge though. How-
Well, no, yeah, broom sedge, that's a whole different one. Yeah, you got a grass there. We don't have a way to control the
Right.
grass within our grasses, so
Right.
we have to deal with those fertility and that kind of thing. But the broadleaf stuff, we can do a pretty good job on.
That's right.
So you already mentioned about herbicides. Let's talk a little bit about, grazing tolerance. I think you were the guy that were there when they were discussing, alpha grazing, and later on we now have persist to choose. So you saw a lot in the last few decades in that, how we can have forage that will have a better performance under grazing, right?
Right. Well, yeah, because used to whenever anybody, a plant breeder would develop a new forage variety, it was always focused on yield. Or maybe there was some disease resistance, but it was primarily focused on yield. And Joe Boughton at the University of Georgia, when he was a plant breeder down there, he really focused a lot of his program on legumes and getting legumes that actually people could use in pastures, not just purely hay systems,
Mhm.
but in pastures. So he started selecting for alpha grays, which that's what I did my PhD work with. And I guess at the time I didn't recognize how revolutionary
Mhm.
that idea is to try to get alfalfa that would be tolerant of grazing. But he released alpha grays. It was a great variety, and it started this whole trend of trying to get varieties that would be more tolerant under either grazing or heavy traffic type conditions. So a lot of the varieties that came out had that, and then it opened up. Then he started developing varieties of clovers
Mhm.
that would be more persistent. So he, instead of going with Ladano white clovers, he went with some of the medium types, and he had, Durana and Patriot and those ones. And then that kind of opened people's eyes again to the need for the more persistence. And so Bob Conger here at UT ended up releasing Persist, which was a variety of orchard grass that was more grazing tolerant. And then after, Bob retired, we started working on Persist to get it more grazing tolerance, and that's where Persist 2 came out of. And I learned how to do that. I'm not a plant breeder, and I would never want to be a plant breeder. I don't have any intentions on doing that ever again. It takes a long time
Yeah,
to
yeah.
develop a
A
variety.
long shot, yeah.
But I mean, I basically did it the same way Joe Boughton did. He planted a bunch of alfalfa and just grazed it as hard as he possibly could.
Grazed to death.
And so that way, the only ones that survive are gonna be tolerant of grazing. Well, we did the same thing with the Persist. We grazed it with sheep
Mhm.
to try to graze it as smooth as this tabletop if we could. And the ones that survived, those are the ones that then we took forward and all. And it works. It's you put incredible selection pressure and kill everything that won't survive grazing, and what's left has got to be the ones that survive.
That's right.
So I'm sure there's probably going to be other varieties. I would think,
Mhm.
you would hope that anybody that does any breeding for forage varieties has that as one of their selection criteria, because that's really where we, need our forage species is to survive in pasture situations.
Yeah. Yeah, and as we think about those improved varieties and just improving our forage systems overall, the way that we establish those have changed, right? Different planting technologies have changed over time. Tell us a little bit about what you've seen with that.
Yeah, well, so Tennessee is one of the leaders in no-till planting. And when I first started, I mean, I didn't introduce no-till to Tennessee. It was getting started, but our equipment, man, it's so much
Mhm.
better now than it used to be. When I started, we used a brand of drill called a tie, and it worked. I mean, it worked fine, but it was hard to control the depth. You did it with these springs, and you have to pry these springs down and you bust your knuckles, and it was set up in such a way so that the opener, the disc that opened the furrow and where the seed dropped, they were kind of far separated. And on hillsides in Tennessee, one of the problems you'd have is that they would get on a hillside and they'd get out of line. So you'd open your furrow, but here you drop your seed over here. They wouldn't be lined up.
They test the equipment in Kansas and then they brought it to Tennessee, right?
I mean,
Yeah.
it worked,
Yeah.
okay, but it has some limitations. And so then you went, the next type of drills that kind of came on were called, it was a bigger drill. It was something called either Haybuster or Duratec. And it had a double disc opener and the whole mechanism was much closer. So
Line up, yeah.
they didn't tend to get out of line. It was easier to control the depth
Mhm.
because it was easier to deal with the press wheel. You didn't have that spring to try to deal with. And then it went from there to, Great Plains
Mhm.
and John Deere, and they made improvements. So now those are so much easier to calibrate and control the depth. And now, you end up with bigger drills so that now it's much easier to plant
Mhm.
using no-till drills, just because the drills are easier to work with and the technology and the advancements in the engineering and everything that have come on. In fact, I'm not sure I've planted anything other than using no-till drills in probably, 15 or 20 years.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think that's important, right, Gary? Even nowadays, we will still be able to find people working the ground. And if you were in the middle US, I see that. I don't like it as well, but if you're in a flat area, that's fine. But there is no flat area in Tennessee, right? We have really small flat areas here.
Right,
In all farmers I have been visiting here, all farmers I have been talking with, they all have some source of hills there or some source of declive. So how can we deal with this? How do you see this trend from the 1990s from now, and why we still have some people that are like to work the ground? Is it something that we are
Yeah.
still carrying with us, or can you see in 20, 30 years that we will be 100% no till everywhere?
I don't say we're gonna be 100% no-till. I think I can't say I know what the numbers are, but I say we're a very, very high percentage of no-till. There's still some situations where you want to work the ground up.
Okay.
If you need something that you need to smooth out
Mhm.
and anything, there may be some situations where there are some people, that they want to kind of stay away from herbicides because the way that they market either their forages
Or
or
organic is, or
the
yeah.
animals, is that they try to limit the
Mhm.
herbicide use, so they try to stay away from, glyphosate and
Mhm.
everything. I get that. And so we'll help people if they get ready to want to plant that way, we'll help them know how to be able to do it. You had to be really careful, because your timing is very important
Mhm.
and you can end up with some, soil erosion that we
Exactly.
really don't want to have. I like planting no-till because I think it's faster.
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
Instead of having to go over, with a plow and a disc and then cultipacking and then broadcasting and then cultipacking again, you spray it,
Drilling.
a week, 10 days later, you come in, you drill, and it's 2 passes that you've made. And then the other thing that I've seen is that it lengthens your planting window. I remember one of the first, when I started this job, my predecessor, Joe Burns, he still was working with me and helped me with stuff. We got ready to go plant some alfalfa. And we were gonna no-till it, and we were down in the Sweetwater Valley in Madison County and or Madisonville. And we were doing it like the 3rd week of May. And I remember on the way down there, I'm like, man, Joe, it seems like this is awful late to be planting alfalfa. And he goes, Pates, don't worry about it, it'll be all right, and they sprayed some wheat that had been mowed for haylage with paraquat. It killed it that day. We came back the next day, no-tilled, and since you didn't work it up, it conserved that soil moisture. And it let you be able to no-till alfalfa into, mid to late May.
Mhm.
Whereas if you were working it conventionally, you'd have to be several weeks ahead of that.
Mhm.
And so I like, and then the other thing, if you get ready to work the ground up and then a rainstorm comes,
Oh gosh.
you gotta let it dry.
Mhm.
And then chances are you're going to have to come in here and shape it up again because you have
Mhm.
gullies through there.
Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
you don't have to do that with no-till. And anybody that, if you pay attention to details when you're planting, man, no-till is incredibly successful.
Mhm.
Agree 100% with you. So we already mentioned about these plants that we have, to graze better, equipment to plant better, herbicides that will help us to keep pastures, in good shape. But you also saw a lot of changes in the way we conserve forage, right? We're basically hay guys 30 years ago. Now we can we have hay, we have baleage, you have haylage. We learn how to wrap the bales.
Right, right.
How was that?
Yeah, now that technology came on during my career, because used to, when I started, if you got ready to make haylage or a hay crop silage, whatever term you want to use, you chop it, you put it in an upright or a trench silo or something like that, cover it and that kind of thing. And there wasn't really a way to make round bale haylage. And so there was some people that started trying it. So what they do is they take and they roll it in their regular hay, hay baler. And then there was these big black, they looked like big garbage bags. And you try to roll that bale in there and, maybe put a vacuum on it to suck a vacuum, and then you tie it up just like a garbage bag.
It's like putting your sleeping bag back in that bag.
Oh,
Never
it
get
was
it.
so, because that bale, I mean, whereas normally a round bale is gonna be 750 to 1,000 pounds. And these things were like 50 or 60% water. And so trying to take this big bale and get it lined up, and then some, 2 or 3 people trying to push it, and oh, it was just like, this is just ridiculous, But they did like that, and then the wrappers, the individual bale wrappers, where you could put that bale on that platform and it would spin it and wrap it. Those things started, and those worked well. They were the difficulty there is in you had to, wherever you set them is that's where they were. Otherwise, you'd have to, you couldn't poke, you didn't want to poke a hole in the plastic. So, that was a little bit of thing. And then the inline wrappers came to where you were then making the long tubes, and it was faster, and it let a lot of people be able to cut hay on a much more timely basis. That was the big thing. It's hard to make hay in Tennessee or in the Southeast because of rainfall. We need to cut the last of April, 1st of May, something like that. And it's just hard to do because it rains every afternoon and all. Whereas if you make that haylage, instead of needing 5, 6, 7 days from cutting to baling, now you
can
need
do it faster.
1.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's been a huge advancement. And it's probably improved the quality of our forage. In fact, it was only dairy producers that would make any sort of a hay crop silage.
Okay.
Because they needed the quality. Beef producers would all make hay, and now what you see.
Now it's
over
everywhere,
time,
yeah.
Even beef producers recognize the value of getting, because it lets you get that first cutting up early, which gives you a chance now then to get a second high quality cut, because you haven't waited so late to cut that first one.
Right.
And so, that's been fun to see that technology go. Now it's expensive, and all, but but the wrappers and everything, the technology, those things work, the plastic gets available. And so, that's been fun to actually watch that happen over the course of the last, 20, 25 years, something like that.
Yeah.
Really nice advancement.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, kind of transitioning away from that conserved forage, thinking back about the grazing systems, and here in Tennessee, we've relied obviously on tall fescue as a great forage base. And we have to think about diversifying our systems, especially in, changing climate and even the land loss piece, right? We have to make our forage systems really efficient. And so thinking about different options that we can use, whether that's novel endophyte fescue or even other forage species. Tell us a little bit about what you've seen in forage advancements there.
Well, so let's talk about the novel endophyte stuff first. So when I came, all we had was either Kentucky 31 or endophyte free species or varieties. And the endophyte free varieties just don't persist.
Right.
It didn't persist in the Tennessee, climate, the ones that we had back then. And so everybody was staying with, the toxic Kentucky 31, tall fescue. And so, our standard recommendation that we made, back then was 248, let's renovate, 2 pounds of white, 4 pounds of red, 8 pounds of annual espinosa. Can't tell you how many times I've said that. But we had to put legumes in there, to be able to try to reduce that fescue toxicosis. And those things actually, I guess, if you look at it, the endophyte stuff really got discovered in those kind of early 80s. Is kind of when man, you go through the names of, Charles Bacon and Carl Hovland and all those guys that did that work on that. And so when I came here, it was still something that was, in the big scheme of things, relatively new. I mean, within the decade of it really getting kind of discovered. And so we focused on that a lot. And then over time, what we have learned since then, is that, you can also not only add in the legumes and everything, but don't graze too low because you got a lot of the alkaloids up to the bottom 3 inches of that plant. Making sure that you mow seed heads off or minimize seed head production, because that's where also a lot of the alkaloids are. And then when the novel endophyte came along to where they, selected for endophytes that give you the good chemicals for the persistence, but they don't produce the bad chemicals for the toxicity. I mean, that was it's another one of those tools that come into your toolbox to be able to use to improve animal production. It's not been, it's not been this revolutionary thing in state because it's expensive to plant that stuff. There's a whole process. You have to make sure you go through and you kill all the old fescue and plant the new stuff. The seed is relatively expensive, but there are some people that use it and use it really well, and particularly the people that are doing some sort of like growing animal, growing beef animal. If they're trying to produce, forage, based, freezer beef, or if they're trying to stock their animals, something like that, that's where it can really fit. And, they've come out with several varieties now. It's, gosh, there's probably a dozen of those things out there now. And they all have the chance to work. And it's exciting to see what happens, and it's just nice to have another tool that so we have that one. And then you mentioned all the other species. That's probably what I've spent the bulk of my career working on. One of the things that I recognized early on here, I started in '93, and I still remember we had a horrible drought that came through in 1997. And we did a huge extension program called Decision 97, and our focus was we knew everybody had fed their hay during the summertime. Because we had no grazing. And so we were trying to figure out how are we going to get them through the winter now without having to sell every animal on their farm. And so we did a series of programs across the state about, trying to use commodity feeds, culling, coming in and stockpiling fescue, because when we did start getting rain in the fall, forage testing. I mean, we did meetings all across the state. Every place we went, everybody that came, you bring a hay sample, we give you a free forage test. And, me and Warren Gill and Clyde Lane, my two, your predecessors, we were driving across the state with, cars, UT cars, full of hay samples, but the thing that I learned from that, is like, look, drought is not unusual.
No.
It's common. You need to expect drought.
Every once in a while we will face it, right?
Right. And if you only have cool season forages, then you're gonna get hit hard. And so we started focusing on using warm season forages. So we started with Bermuda grass. We had a variety of Bermuda grass developed in Tennessee by Mr. Terrell Vaughn, Vaughn's #1, that worked really well. And I had experience obviously with Bermuda grass growing up in South Louisiana. So that fit well with it. And then, from there, we started talking about using sorghum Sudan grass or things like that. And then crabgrass kind of was coming along. So, I mean, I think back about it now, I was very fortunate that I started at a time where there were all these technologies that were coming
Showing
on,
up,
the novel endophyte, the grazing tolerant stuff, Mr. Vaughn with Vaughn's #1. I mean, it just so happened it came on at the same time that I was coming on. The same thing with the Red River crabgrass. Of course, there's several other varieties now. And there were just more of these things that I had the opportunity to try to show producers where they fit.
Right.
And so I spent a lot of my time. In fact, when a lot of counterparts around the nation were focused on grazing management and teaching people about rotational grazing, I kind of started going that way. And then what I recognized is like, look, if I can take somebody and get them to plant 10 acres of Bermuda grass, they're going to have to rotationally graze because they can't fescue and Bermuda grass are not growing at the same time. So they're going to have to rotationally graze. And so that's the way that I try to approach that. And so, yeah, I use the old famous, fescue growth curve and where the warm season fits on there, everybody makes fun of it, but it really, that was kind of the
Yep.
basis of my educational program, is getting people to understand that you can't depend on only fescue. You've
Right.
got to use other species to kind of level out your forage production curve.
Fulfill the forage gaps and bring what I like to call the forage menu, right?
Mhm.
You gotta have more than fescue when you were building a truly forage based system. I think that
Right.
all of those things you mentioned were really, really great. And I as you were talking here, I can see that things, along the years, right? We can see all of these species as we are going to putting them together and building really good forage systems. That's what we have right now in Tennessee. But none of it was easy. None of it was just smooth on the way. When you started here, you didn't have cell phones, for example, right?
Oh, yeah, no.
We need to send you a letter instead of sending you an email, right? How was to be on the top of all of it? How was to try to reach farmers and to answer their questions and be able to serve the farmers in Tennessee without this technology package we have right now?
Yeah. There were aspects of it that was good because people couldn't get it. Period.
Yeah.
You only answer half of them, right?
Yeah, but no, so when I first started, I mean, we had the traditional system where all of my questions came from extension agents.
Mhm.
I rarely got questions directly from producers because they really didn't have a way to get in touch with me. I mean, it wasn't easy to find my phone number because they didn't have the internet.
Sure.
And so they would, contact their agent, and then the agent would call me and if I was in the office, I mean, particularly during the spring and the fall, if I come into the office, I mean, I might spend 6 hours of my day literally on the phone. And, we had a secretary, Miss Alice Harless, who we didn't have voicemail, okay? And so the phone would come to the main office and, she would try to transfer. It wouldn't transfer because I'm on the phone. So she'd take somebody's message on those little pink memo notes, And that's what she would do. She's walk up and down the hall to the different specialists, handing them those pink notes. And, it'd be one of those deals where I'd be on the phone with somebody and she'd hand me 4 more of them. And it would be constant. And then we got the internet. And I'll be honest with you, when it first came on, I didn't know exactly what I was supposed to do with the internet, because it wasn't like it was today where it's kind of intuitive, just going for stuff. It wasn't like that. And then we got email. And again, email at that time was just for within UT people. And so I would be getting some emails from agents and all. And then as it grew, I didn't have a cell phone really at the time. So I can remember that when I would be traveling, I would have to stop every day at 3:30 Central Time, which was 4:30 over here.
Yeah.
I had a long distance phone call, so I had to find a pay phone. I'd call Miss Alice and say, Miss Alice, can you give me my messages? And I'd take down all my names and numbers I need to call. And then I'd call, if I was at the hotel room, or the next day I tried to find time to set aside and call them. And that was what I did every day. It was intuitive, stop at 3:30 and find a payphone somewhere. So we got cell phones, and it was good because now I can call. Well, you're not supposed to call while you're driving. I didn't ever call when I was driving.
You can hands-free
I
call.
pulled off to the but I pulled off to the side of the road. But you can make phone calls.
Yeah.
I can remember
Anywhere,
several times I would be in the field somewhere, and if I came across the issue that I didn't know, my counterparts in Kentucky and Alabama, Gary Lacefield and Don Ball, I would call them on their cell phones and say, "Oh, Don, here's what I'm looking at, man. I need some help, brother." And we would do that kind of thing. And yeah, it's made it so the communication so much easier, either between emails or texting or things like that. I remember a few years ago, the thing when it really hit me, how valuable like the internet is. Now, you get a lot of bad information on the internet.
Sure, yeah.
But there is a
Every
lot out
day.
there. But one time I had an agent that sent me an email, and it had a little blurb from a magazine about a trait in corn that I had never heard of. And he was asking, he had a producer that was asking, is this good? What can we do? And so I had never heard of it. So I just copied the entire paragraph, put it in Google, hit search. I found the magazine article. I read the magazine article, and I was like, okay, so what I did then is I went on to Google Scholar, which, for anybody watching the podcast, that's a website or whatever you call that, but it
The science
searches,
portal.
it searches only the journal articles. So I searched for this trait on Google Scholar, found the people at the University of Florida that have been doing the work. I went onto the internet, went to the Florida website, found their phone number, called them. At once, it took me a couple of minutes for them to recognize that I wasn't just messing with them. I really needed this information. So I had about a 15 or 20-minute conversation with them, got off the phone, typed an email back to that agent that was actually very informed, you know, and gave him that. And when I hit send on it, I sat down, I sat back, and I was like, man, I went in 30 minutes, I went from knowing absolutely nothing about this to actually sending an informed answer to this question. Whereas at the start of my career, that would have probably taken me 3 or 4 months to try to do that. And so it was like, okay, this internet thing, I think it might actually
might
be
work.
beneficial.
It might work.
Might work. And so now, you know, that's the primary, the podcast. Who did podcasts?
Yeah.
Back then, that never even crossed my mind to try to be able to do that. I remember back, you know, when we first started the Beef and Forage Center, I had thought, man, we need to do something like this. I mean, I want us to have kind of a weekly or something where we're trying to push information out, kind of an active way to get information out. And I sat down with Justin Reinhardt, who, you know, now he's my boss, but he was a coworker at the time. And Katie, your predecessor, Jason Smith, was like, look, I got this idea. And they said, well, you know, what about, let's do Facebook Live. And I'm like, Facebook Live, what is Facebook Live? You know, I don't even know what that is, you know, and they described it. And I remember in my mind thinking, that's not what we want to do. But I said, okay, guys, you know, if y'all really feel like this is a good idea,
let me try
it
right?
gets us further down the line, you know, let's try it. Well, that ended up being fantastic thing to do, you know, and they let it seem like I convinced them to do it. In reality, they had the idea. They thought they were going to try to convince me. But yeah, but it's things like that we have the opportunity to be able to do. And it's nice that you have information, you have ways to be able to get information and share information that we've never ever had before.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so thinking about that and thinking about, you know, the future of the way that we communicate and the way that our forage systems are set up, what kind of future innovations do you see coming down the pipeline, or do you hope to see, I guess, as far as forages go in Tennessee or in the Southeast or in the US?
What we don't have that we, you know,
That
it'd be nice to have it.
So I guess actually that's a really good question.
Yeah.
I gotta think about that a little bit, because I don't really know. I mean, because all these innovations that, you know, we've talked about, I didn't particularly see any of them coming. I could have seen the novel endophyte one coming. Okay, because I knew there was going to be some way to deal with the toxicosis. I didn't know whether it was going to be a vaccination or whether it's going to be, you know, this novel endophyte thing. I could have seen that one, but some of these other ones, I don't know if I just was very fortunate to be here when they came out, and it's like, hey, I think we can make this work. So I can't say I'm ever a real visionary. I do think, you know, we're going to have to deal with in the future a lot of these glyphosate resistant weeds. We don't really have those issues right now that much in forage crops, but they're going, you know, we don't have really, all we have for Roundup Ready really is alfalfa. But a lot of those weeds that develop resistance in crop fields, you know,
they will be a challenge in the pastures.
They're going to, we're going to have to try to deal with those.
Yeah.
Good thing about it is I have confidence in the scientists and the technology development, whether it be at, universities, land grant schools, or whether it be in industry.
Industry.
I really have confidence that whatever challenges we face, we'll be able to conquer them. I think we're gonna have issues with water.
Mhm.
In the future is gonna be something we're gonna have to deal with. And so I don't know whether, irrigation strategies is gonna be something we have to deal with. We normally don't think about irrigating forage crops, really. But I think we may end up having to do that in the future. Water is something, that if you grow up in the southeast, water has never been an issue. I've never
Right,
thought
take it
about
for granted, right?
Yes, we do take
Yeah.
it for granted, but I think we're probably gonna have to deal with some of those kind of issues. And then the other thing is, and I mean, it's here now, you kind of mentioned it at the beginning, is land use.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is if we're going to maintain a livestock industry, we're gonna have to be really efficient with our land use, because land is our limiting factor. And a lot of our forage land, or particularly our high quality forage land,
Mhm.
is perfect to build houses.
Yeah.
Yeah. And close to the big cities, right? And Tennessee
Yes.
has been growing population a
Right.
lot, so
And so
It's
it's
a
a kind
challenge.
of thing where I think we're gonna have to, if you want to stay in the livestock industry, you're gonna have to really be a lot more efficient with your use and get
Sure.
as much production per acre as you can.
Sure.
So it's gonna be, interseeding multiple species. We've always focused on, having kind of separate acres of cool and warm, because it's easier to manage that way.
Mhm.
But I think there's gonna be a lot of people that are not gonna be able to do that. You're gonna have to have them intermixed,
Planted
which
together.
raises the intensity of management. Your
Sure.
management's gonna be more important. Your
Mhm.
fertilization is gonna have to be timed correctly, and all of those type of things. I foresee that being something that's gonna be kind of a issue we have to deal with.
That's great. That's great. Well, Gary, thank you so much for being here again with us. I think my last question for you would be, what do you miss the most from being a forage specialist and now head of the department? With that, we can close here.
Man, I miss the interaction with producers
Mhm.
and the chance to be able to kind of answer questions and deal with specific agricultural problems. I miss working with the producers. That's
Yeah.
really, I would
Yeah.
say by far that's it. And hopefully, I'll still be able to fit, some of the meetings and whenever there, but to be able to go out to a group of
Mhm.
master beef meeting, whatever
Sure.
it is, and be able to sit there and talk about whatever topic and then answer questions and
Mhm.
see the friends that you've made over the course of the 30 years. Oh, man, I do miss that.
That's great. Well, thank you again for being here with us.
Right.
I would like to say, very, very I cannot describe how nice it is for me to be able to be part of this transition here and be working with you and Katie in this. It's really nice. So as we wrap up our live stream today, I want to again thank you, Dr. Bates, for being here with us to join us in this Live.Stock episode again, and hope you all can join us for the June episode. Thanks for being here with us.